Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk. I'm with David Frank. My name is Eric Kirk. We are talking national news of the day, political news in particular. And the big news, I think, in terms of politics is 8.5 inflation over the past year. It is, of course, the biggest um, annual inflation in the past 40 years. I think you have to go back to 1981. I think we've been breaking that record with each month. Possibly some relief in sight. We'll talk a little bit about that. But how do the Democrats survive this? The big items, of course, that affect most people, of course, are oil and gas. That's probably the biggest factor in March. Was oil. The prices were going up, of course, in the fall, but the war in Ukraine obviously hasn't helped that. And all of the countries where we buy oil are countries with despots, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, Texas, you name it. This is where we get our oil, and they're dictating the terms. Is there a lot of talk about becoming fossil fuel free, independent? Well, no. There's talk about, oh, we need to drill more. We got to keep drilling more. We got to prep for this. And I'm just frustrated as I'm watching these interviews with these oil industry apologists, just gleefully talking about how, yeah, we need to put off any planning around climate change mitigation. Very frustrating, and we will talk about this later in the show. But with inflation also affecting food, I have a few things to say about that. Meat, of course, has gone through the roof, but not everything. If you stick to produce, especially locally grown produce, or produce that doesn't need a passport, you're probably doing okay. If you stick to certain dairy, you're probably doing okay. If you stick to booze, you might be doing okay. Certain items are actually not going up that quickly, and with the exception of the booze, if you stick to some healthy items, you're probably doing fine. But rent is going up, even though used cars kind of did an improvement in March. It's the oil that has driven things up, and that affects everything. And what is going to be the impact of this? According to a poll, 68% of people do blame Russians for the price of oil and the war in Ukraine, but 52% of the same polling segment also blame Democrats and Biden. What do you do about that, Dave?
So there's the headline number, which is shocking to everybody because it's the highest since 1981. Like you said, I think last month's CPI was also the highest since around that time. So we're getting new information regularly, and that's affecting us. And people are saying, hey, I'm experiencing higher prices, and I'm hearing about and reading about and seeing higher prices. So you're the way you wanted to frame this is, do the Democrats have a chance of surviving on this in November? So before we get into the political implications, I just want to mention, like, sort of generally speaking, the Consumer Price Index includes food, energy, rent, and the reporting around today's release or this week's release is that those are the key things that are going up. And then, it's so problematic for people to hear it and see it and experience it that the Fed has signaled and indicated they're going to raise rates. I think it was 6 times over the coming 9 months or so. So there's
a little bit more urgency than before.
Exactly. So with this urgency, people, analysts are saying that will trigger a recession, which by definition is, the negative growth over a couple quarters. So in other words, if our economy is accelerating quickly and rates get raised, it'll slow down. That's a recession when it goes negative and it slows down. So that's combined with the fact that our country's debt to size of our economy versus our debt, it's about 130% the debt to GDP. And so as the government rolls over this debt, it's going to be increasingly costly as interest rates go up. It's mitigated a little bit because if the Federal Reserve has that debt on their balance sheet, they just return the interest back to Treasury. It's kind of a technical thing. But so that said, that's the big picture. Those things are sort of beyond the president's control. for the most part. So the question is, will this be alarming to the analysts? And I think when you look at core inflation doesn't even include those elements. Maybe some analysts are going to say, well, it's not really harmful to the economy. It's harmful to perceptions. And so that's one of the things that I think there's a way to explain to people. Look, we saw inflation during COVID because of lockdowns and scarcity, and the economy, was hit hard. Now that we've recovered, there's huge increases in activity and demand, and in prices. And so because energy makes up such a component of food, once the attack happened, 2 months ago or so, then the massive increase in energy prices now is feeding into food prices, because 70% of food price is actually energy pass-throughs from input costs. So in a way, what I'm getting at is, when demand went up, the prices were very sticky. These higher prices are sticky, and so it seems to me that there's no real end in sight before the election. As far I've heard otherwise, but I would say there's no real end to the job owning that's going to happen about how this is being mismanaged. But I think, in fact, it's really like the potential for like a price wage spiral is there, and people, they're going to continue to have a difference between the labor cost increase, which is up 5%, and the inflation cost up is 8%. That's still going to be there, that gap. So people are going to pay real prices, feel the pinch, and I don't really see much of a reprieve other than actual leadership and guidance saying what they're going to do to combat it. But so far, we're not getting that clarity of message that's reassuring people that there's going to be some mitigation of what we're experiencing before the election.
Yeah, I mean, and who knows? Of course, you never know what an economy is going to do. There could be things that deflate it like within months. I mean, that's just things that happen. We never know. People weren't able to predict what was happening, 5 minutes in advance back in the fall. So I never know what's going to happen. And so for people to say, oh, this is going to happen well into 2023, they don't really know that. They look at it, they look at patterns, historical patterns. But the fact of the matter is, one of the issues for a lot of people commenting on these things is that the average age of people who are managing portfolios these days are about 45. None of them have actually experienced inflation like this before. This is, this is something, and in fact, even I'm 58, almost 58 now. I experienced it as a child. I didn't really experience it, as somebody who had to deal with things. So it's really been a long time since we've dealt with this as a nation. It's just, and so how is it? But the fact of the matter is, it's one of those things that really isn't a president or political party's fault, but you can't escape taking the blame for it. It doesn't matter that it isn't, and it doesn't matter that we had another great jobs report, this last month. It just isn't, a couple weeks ago. It doesn't matter that the economy is actually doing pretty well. If inflation is high and you've got those high gas pump prices and you've got to pay for the meat, and you don't want to have to go to the vegetable aisle and have to come home and try to serve your kids healthy meals. You don't want to have to do that. That's that lifestyle. Americans aren't good at altering lifestyles to deal with things. That to them is hardship.
So the two edges of this sword, I think, one is the timeline we're talking about. You mentioned it's hard to tell what's going to happen next year, and I would just mention that, primaries are within the next 4 to 10 weeks, and then the general election is 6-7 months out. So we really are there's a lack of a window of time for a pattern to change people's perceptions, and so a lot of the opinions are entrenched already. And then the question, I'm going to mention this later, but it comes down to motivation. What are people's motivation and enthusiasm? And I suspect that they're people feeling the pinch. We're talking about inflation after all. People feeling this pinch have enthusiasm, and folks who are potentially not motivated by this are less enthusiastic to go make a statement on this topic.
All right. Well, we'll obviously be talking about it later, but we need to go to the next topic. Okay, we've been talking a lot about the war. The war is kind of at I don't want to say quiet time. They're still fighting. I mean, Mariupol, I don't even know how to say it, there's still intense fighting there. Skirmishes all over the place, but the Russians are still gathering for another major front from Donetsk and in the east, and ostensibly to basically try to encircle the Ukraine army in the east, and hope to cut them off. And Ukraine is trying to move its troops to the east without giving too much up in near Kiev and in the west. They are begging for weapons. The West is kind of upping the level that it's giving. Today, Biden announced $800 million in new aid that includes helicopters and some mobile artillery that is a little bit more than just the javelins and quote unquote defensive weapons that they've given in the past. But there's still a big hesitancy to give them long range missiles and airplanes, because that'll be seen as an escalation. And a lot of people are saying, why? What is the fear of this? If the Russians were going to see anything as an escalation, it's the fact that what we've given them already defeated them already. To a large point in Kiev, they're already pissed off. And they're not going to be any less or more if we give them the weapons that defeat here. And it's not airplanes just to fight the Russian air superiority, but to also handle the troops on the ground, to basically chase them out of the country, out of Crimea. I still don't even know how to say that. Everybody tells me I'm saying it wrong, and to chase the ships off of the coast of Odessa. I mean, it's so why not Crimea? Okay, all right, Dave.
So the topic for us today is the president being too cautious, and so that's from what we've spoken about now for going on 2 months.
I did forget one thing, is that Quinnipiac has a poll. Quinnipiac, to preface, has been possibly the harshest non-Republican poll on Biden. Has him at 38% approval rate when everybody else has them anywhere from 40 to 45% approval rating there. But it has his approval rating for the conduct of the war at 39% in a poll released today. Probably on the low side, but still kind of striking, considering that the Russians were driven out of the country largely due to the aid that he's provided. But people, I think, are asking, why not give them the planes they're asking for? So go ahead, Dave. Sorry.
That's quite right. So like I said, is the president being too cautious? And what we've talked about for the last couple months is trying to thread the needle here, or walk the tightrope of non-escalation. Because like in the film War Games, the only way to win this game is not to play. The truth is that a direct confrontation between the United States and Russia is unthinkable. But it's being framed around the world as a conflict between liberal democracies and authoritarian regimes writ large. So it's not just, does Putin want to annex Donbass region and Crimea formally in Ukraine? If that was really what was at stake, he wouldn't have had to invade Kiev. So where we are today is, I would argue that the president has been successful in that goal of non-escalation, but we're seeing changes, for example, in the tone and in the realities on the ground. So much so that, for example, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, the presidents of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland have all met with Zelensky already.
In Ukraine.
Yes, exactly. In the capital. And there are war crimes investigations from the International Criminal Court. There's an assigned person there going to some I don't know, since the last time we talked, there's been more evidence of some horrific tragedies.
And Biden himself used the word genocide and isn't walking it back.
Right. And on top of that, what I would say is that Finland and Sweden, who have effectively been neutral, some degree of neutrality in this geostrategic conflict, the Cold War, exactly. They now want to join NATO, and they're being told they could conceivably get fast tracked. And then there's been also talk of EU membership for Ukraine. So there's been lots of advances on the margins. I mean, these aren't even margins. These are huge advances towards a realignment to a certain extent. And as you said, a new class of weapons have been approved. So this extra 800 million now brings it up to 3 billion that has been given to Ukraine. The United States, President Biden has said, we'll give what we need to give as we need to give it. 5,000 troops were just deployed to a new temporary base in Poland, which is a staging area. It's basically, they're not saying what it's for, but a massive U.S. NATO operations center is now being built in Poland near the border. So these things are happening. What's the word? Reciprocal momentum in response to a new buildup. And then last thing I want to mention is, Putin has purged 150 or so, reports are, of his top intelligence officials.
Yes.
And he has appointed General Alexander Dvornikov to be the new commander of the battle theater, a coordinated leader, which didn't exist prior. And this person is known, obviously I'm not going to go through saying, he's a butcher or whatever, but he has been involved in Chechnya, he's been involved in Syria, and it's massive humanitarian decimation. Attacking civilians is not supposed to be part of modern war. Attacking a sovereign country isn't either. But so that's where we are. We're at this place where I think the president is doing the right thing in the sense that he's trying to balance all perspectives. But not to be a filibuster here, but I do want to say one last thing. I have seen, like, the former commander of NATO, former Supreme Commander of NATO, just in the last couple of days, start to say, look, this is actually time. It's time for all of it.
Yeah,
now
this is the time before they're ready for this major offensive. Give them the planes to attack the ground troops. Do it before it's summer, before everything. Do it. They can chase them out. I mean, that's that is the time. Don't wait for this aid. Give them the planes, give them the anti-ship missiles, which apparently they're getting from Britain at this point. And the United States has said they don't oppose the planes. They just don't want to be the country that gives it to them. I mean, come on, just get them the planes is my thinking. Now, I'm an amateur. I'm not a military person. I'm not advising Biden. I'm not, somebody who's involved with the protocols of war and how to avoid war. Maybe there's stuff I don't know and I'm missing there. This is not my area of expertise. I'm learning a lot more about war technology than I ever wanted to know with this war. But then he needs to really be thorough with his explanation as to why the planes are not being delivered to Zelensky, because it just seems like if the Russians, their primary plane, the Su-34, they're being dropped. That was supposed to be their invincible plane to replace their Su-24s, and they're being dropped. We're watching it seen on video. We don't even know which Ukrainian weapons are bringing them down. The Russians don't know, and so they've withdrawn them because they only have like 200 of them, and they already lost anywhere from 4 to 10 of them, and they don't want to keep doing it. So they can't use the planes. So if the Ukrainians can use them, that could give them the edge to just basically force Russia out of their country. This is the time, it seems. But again, I'm just listening to what I'm watching on television, and I don't know who's advising Biden, where it's coming from, and what it's based on. But I have a feeling that's why his poll numbers are low on this.
So I would say one last thing. In the beginning, we were talking about diplomacy. First 3 weeks of this, and we'll talk about it more. But Putin did come out and say diplomacy is over. because I'm recalibrating and basically redeploying, and we're taking Donbass, we're taking Crimea, and in theory they're going to potentially take all the way to Odessa. So that's where we are. We're at the point where their off ramps. The public perception is that the off ramps from Russia aren't there, and then so now the question is, can they be stopped from this belligerence? And we'll know more, I think, in the coming, but by May 9th. May 9th is when that big event is supposed to happen in Russia, where they talk about their strength, and we'll see between now and May 9th what that actually means when they flex their muscles, unfortunately.
We'll see. They haven't gotten anywhere near Odessa, but anyway, we'll talk about that another time. Brings us to our next topic.
Emissions of greenhouse gases need to peak within the next 3 years if we're to stave off the worst effects of climate change. And even then, we'd still need new technology to suck carbon dioxide out of the skies by the middle of the century.
Some government and business leaders are saying one thing but doing another. Simply put, they are lying. And the results will be catastrophic.
Harnessing the power of the sun and the wind will not be enough.
Pretty much everything has to change because pretty much everything we do produces carbon dioxide. It is possible, says today's report, but time is almost out. We've got to peak carbon emissions before 2025, says the UN, and then cut them back by at least 43% by the end of 2030. And then we need to take them all the way down to net zero by 2050. It is a tall order, especially given that emissions are currently going up, not down.
Okay, we're going to go back to oil. Of course, oil has been all over the place because we have this war. Russia is the biggest oil producer in the world, and with all of these boycotts and embargoes and punishment against Russia and the oligarchs, it's one thing that some of the Western European countries are just not willing to give up. It's the oil. They are dependent on this oil, and unfortunately, as mentioned, most of the oil seems to, for some reason, maybe there's a connection there, come from despotic regimes, whether they're in Asia or Central Asia, whether they're in Latin America. And so the big push is, we should just be tearing up our own, federal lands and our own offshore to get all the oil we can and make us so that we are oil independent, and very little discussion of investing to become oil free. And I watched this guy on PBS's Amanpour last night. He just didn't even want to hear of it. He says, no, we need to be investing to expand, and it's going to take years to build up our oil infrastructure for oil independence, and no electric cars are, that's just not going to happen, and blah, blah, blah. And meanwhile, California announced today that they want to triple the amount of electric car sales here, but we've got infrastructure here. Most states don't have it, right? So, and unfortunately, we've got two senators that will block any Build Back Better proposal that moves us towards other types of power and and alternatives to oil. Meanwhile, the price of oil has dropped, partly because Biden putting the reserves into the economy, into the oil economy, has helped, and maybe it'll continue to help for quite some time. Other factors as well. Public transit use has gone up, and maybe people are just not. Maybe it has affected how often people drive, and supply demand. Maybe it finally did kick in. I mean, for some reason, nobody applies supply and demand, microeconomics to oil use. It just is presumed that it's fixed. Demand is fixed. But it seems like, other than maybe some talk of Germany firing up its nuclear plants again to have some type of independence, there's just an attempt to just basically drown out any discussion of moving towards fossil-free power at this moment. Dave.
Yeah, so we're talking about is climate change mitigation policy dead until the war in Ukraine is over? And I think that that's a really poignant question that you've asked of us today, because it's a first principle here. It's no longer not to say that we can't walk and chew gum at the same time, but the world we lived in 2 months ago is different than the world we live in today. And when the Build Back Better and we're talking trillions, hundreds of billions of dollars, we're going to theoretically go into a real tangible efforts to transition our economy. That was domestic concern. But right now we're worried about all the domestics. We're worried about all 180 odd countries in the world, because we're trying to pull 5 million barrels a day out of a 80 million barrel system. And so what do you do about that? And so I think that's kind of become the new priority. And it's about, a lot of it is about message. I talked about it last week, how they're saying it's time for a Marshall Plan. And so that means different things to different people. Obviously, Energy Secretary Granholm is saying that's why we need to invest in more green things. So, for example, just efficiency, like I talked about last week, I think, or I've been, the week's blur, but theoretically, we can lower our heating and cooling costs of, by 70% with more efficient buildings, and the models are there. The models are in place to do so. So if we could focus like a laser beam, like a moonshot, and on lowering demand, that would serve a similar purpose to cutting 5% out of the world market. But if you invest heavily in greening now, you're not going to mitigate the actual concern, which is how are we going to keep the world flowing through this season of war. So I think your premise is right. The administration does need to do what it can do to stabilize prices, which when people say that sometimes that means enhanced production, it might very well mean that in the short term. But one thing that I think people sometimes take for granted is that the market is rational, and our oil and natural gas markets are not rational. In fact, if you talk to some experts, they say that the primary part of the price is fear and greed, not the actual cost of getting the oil produced and distributed. Yeah. That fear and greed is really what's driving what's happening right now, which is psychological, which means psychological efforts need to be made to comfort people, to have a plan, to execute a plan. And finally, the elephant in the room here is China and India. No matter what Europe decides to do and what the United States decides to do, if Russia can sell all their oil and gas that gets stopped coming in our direction, they'll still get, I think the number was about $250 billion in cash per year right now. And that they've brought in, they bring in, close to whatever that works out to, that's $2 billion, whatever it is. It's an immense amount of money in cash that they're getting, not quite $1 billion a day, but they are getting a lot of cash from their sales. If they could just shift it over to China and India, then they're not going to be very much impacted. So it is really like this three-dimensional chess that's going on.
It's hard, and that part of the problem is even when they're trying to negotiate a kind of a Build Back Better with some type of climate change and moving towards alternative energy, Manchin says something stupid like, "Oh well, I don't want electric cars because I don't like waiting in lines." Right? He does, because they know even if they make like a deal where 95% of it is going to go towards development of oil and 5% towards development of hybrid and electric technologies, once they lose that 5%, they've lost it forever. It doesn't go back, right? Anytime they move any type of infrastructure towards solar, wind, hydro, or anything, it's there for good. It's not like, okay, we'll give that up and then we'll win it back later competitively. They don't. They lose it forever. So it's like an attrition. They lose it bit by bit. So they don't want to give up an inch on that. They didn't even really like giving it up to nuclear. Right. I mean, it's just they really don't want it. But that's so they don't want to even have a compromise. They just want it to be oil, oil, oil. And that's what I saw on Amanpour last night. This guy was just gung ho, oil, oil, oil. said, and we have to balance it with, our climate change mitigation. But he never said anything about what we should do about climate change mitigation. He was just a complete, I'm sorry, I'm going to say this, oil industry whore. I'm sorry. And that's who they brought on. It was just, I was like, I couldn't believe everything that came out of his mouth. Every question was just oriented towards this glee. We're going to have to drill more, and not only just right now, but we're going to have to invest, and it'll take 2 or 3 years that we're going to have more and more natural gas. We'll be the natural gas seller to Europe. I mean, it's just, and meanwhile, we've got record hurricane and rains caused by climate change this year. And we have this mega drought that we can't pull out of in California. And fires probably are going to happen again this season, and they don't even want to, they just want to pretend like it's not happening.
I think I've made mistakes. I mean, every time somebody says I made a mistake, they do the polls and my numbers go up. So I guess I haven't made any mistakes.
We showed up and we demonstrated that we would not have our voices silenced by a Republican Party that across the country had a singular intention on suppressing the right to vote.
Some Democratic senators seem to imagine they could just break the rules on a razor-thin majority. Nothing would stand between them and their entire agenda, a new era of fast-track policymaking.
The Republican Party moved very far away from reality. And the fact that you got colleagues of mine in the Senate who refuse even today to acknowledge that Donald Trump lost the election. How do you deal with that?
Joe Biden is the president we need right now. Battle-tested, forward-looking, honest and authentic. He has never forgotten who he is fighting for.
Okay. Well, who knows? Maybe within the next year, we won't be talking about Trump so much. Trump is trying to flex his muscle. He has endorsed Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania. He's got the Ohio Senate candidates begging for his endorsement. He has backed the football player in Georgia, and he's now about to pour a bunch of money into Purdue's campaign because Kemp is beating him in fundraising and in the polls in the primaries down there. There's a book coming out that basically is going to suggest that had Kemp invalidated the election in Georgia, I'm not sure he even had the power to do that, but had he done that, that other states would have followed according to their analysis. So he really is mad at Kemp because he thinks he would have been president but for Kemp. And so he's flexing his muscle as much as he has it. But in the meantime, he's been holding rallies. There haven't been a lot of people showing up. McConnell's basically just been rolling his eyes and shrugging his shoulder over stuff on Sunday morning, saying basically Trump is not relevant anymore. Not saying that outright. Is Trump relevant anymore?
So I know that you said, like, you frame this as, hey, is the Trump factor dead? Is Trump irrelevant? I don't think so. I wish it wasn't the case. I wish he self-marginalized, but it's just too much support for flipping the table out there. The table that was flipped when he became president, they want to flip it again. It's now that Biden is in office. So there's a lot of energy here in this midterm, anti-establishment, anti-administration energy. You mentioned some of the states, Pennsylvania, he's endorsed Oz because Parnell, who he endorsed prior, had to drop out
because he beat his wife.
Yeah. And so, I'm just gonna dial, drill down here. So some people are saying, well, look, if he endorsed this, awful candidate, now he's endorsing another awful candidate that doesn't even have the support of conservatives and doesn't even have the support of Trump's own allies and supporting crew. Right. So what people are saying is, well, I still support Trump because he's, some people are saying I still support Trump because he's being undermined by his own staffers. But that's not true because David McCormick, who's also running in Pennsylvania, is actually being supported. He's a hedge fund executive, for folks who don't know. He's also running there. So he's being supported by Hope Hicks, Stephen Miller, a bunch of Trump staffers. So it's not like Trump's inner team is saying, go support Oz. So I think it's more that Trump is what's the word? He likes the shiny penny. He goes for the big names, the names that are popular. So, for example, he supports Herschel Walker in Georgia because he's popular. He supports Oz because he's a celebrity. But J.D. Vance, I think, is really trying to get his support. Isn't clear if he's going to in Ohio. It's not clear.
Well, but he wrote a book. That's not like a football player or a reality television guy, though.
But it's Hillbilly Elegy, and it talks about how the rural people are left behind, and it's the big movie was made out of it.
It's actually a good book, but he hawked it on NPR and not on Fox News.
Right. So I guess what I'm getting at is that he's endorsing candidates that aren't strategic from the perspective of a Mitch McConnell or the perspective of an actual insider Republican activist, and that's not to say that these candidates are going to win. So that's one thing, and then the other piece of this is a primary season, and let's keep our eye on the prize. When it comes to the primaries, he's probably going to pick a lot of candidates, like the person running in Arizona, Carrie Lake, who's running for governor in Arizona. He's picking her because she's one of the people that are supporting him the most and stop the steal the most. And so like basically people who parrot his election frauds, whatever you want to call it, drama, which is really what it is. Unfortunately, it's an awful drama, but it's not much more than drama. But so let's take a step back, 30,000 feet. We're talking about the presidency after the midterms, 2024. Is he relevant or not in that regard? He has stockpiled $110 million for his Save America PAC. The biggest check, pretty much the only check he's ever written for anyone besides himself, is this attempt to support Perdue to defeat Kemp, who didn't do the Stop the Steal scheme with him. So this is really more about him, I think, than it's about actually being affecting party outcomes. And so just cause and effect here. What happened with that $500,000? Immediately after that check was issued, within just a couple of days, they started running ads that said, if Kemp can't beat voter fraud, he won't beat Stacey Abrams. And so that that's really where they're at. I think it's really easy to read the tea leaves on this one. So is he relevant? Yes, he's relevant because he has a base. Is he going to impact this primary election season? I don't think so much. I think it's going to be more about the local, like Tip O'Neill says, all politics are local. It's going to be about on the ground candidates and how it impacts people's real lives, not the sideshow of the prior president.
Well, there was a Republican operative who privately said, yes, he is still relevant. He can blow it for us. So it's just that they're worried about that because he puts all this money into Purdue, either weakens Kemp heavily, by attacking him, or wins, and Purdue has less chance of beating Stacey Abrams because he's a little bit farther out there. His candidate will probably defeat Cheney in the primary in Wyoming. And also the people who voted for his indictment, his impeachment, are, I think, the 11th person just announced their retirement last week in the House. And Romney is thinking about whether or not he's going to run again in 2024. He's got a Trumper person chomping at the bits, waiting to run for him there in Utah. So he's definitely still relevant. Murkowski, big question there. Although it doesn't appear that she's in the danger everybody thought she was going to be in. And she always has that option of running as an independent and drawing, in the general election and drawing Democratic votes. And she voted for Jackson, and, she seems to position herself always that way, needing it. So is he relevant? Definitely he's relevant. He's got enough power to mix things up. Does he have the influence to become president again? I don't know. The big issue is going to be is how does he interface with DeSantis, who the Republicans want to be running in 2024.
And before I talk about DeSantis, I don't know how much time we have left, just a few minutes. I think it's also important to mention that there are there's the January 6th committee,
right?
That could conceivably somehow the floor could drop out in some way that it's hard to wrap your head around right now. There's also new evidence of pay to play, so to a certain extent, corruption. I mean,
and then Manafort's buddy just got caught in Ukraine. The guy he worked as an advisor for 10 years and denied it. I mean, there's a bunch of things that could happen there. I mean, there's all kinds of things that could happen that, we just don't know about. But anyway.
Yeah. So I mean, that's really what I was going to say, is there could always be this left field, almost like we talked about with knowing what inflation is going to look like a year from now, which we won't know that ever. You can't, nobody can predict that. Similarly, I don't think we can predict how all this legal troubles are going to play out when it comes to the conspiracy to undermine the congressional proceeding, quote unquote. I think that's what's really being pursued here, to try to push him out of the box, if at all possible, make him ineligible to run.
Yeah, no, I mean, anyway, well, there's a lot there. And we didn't get to talk about Wisconsin, where Ron John had invested himself in the Stop the Steal, and who's kind of backing off and staying quiet about it later. And we'll see how his opponent takes him on that. But I'm sure we'll be discussing Trump again. I'm sure he's not going to fade out of the news entirely, but it's interesting. That takes us to our last topic.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
Our final topic. Unfortunately for Biden's policy of wanting to maybe denuclearize a bit, and for those people who were hoping that maybe we could step back away from the possibility of nuclear war, Biden had wanted to eliminate one particular cruise missile program. It's I forget, it's a bunch of letters and numbers. It's not a real catchy name for it, but it is a sea-borne missile that has a nuclear tip that he wanted to scrap, along with a couple other programs, including a gravity dumb bomb that is a nuclear bomb, and a few other things. And he's been getting a lot of pushback from the military. And of course, now that we've got this confrontation with Russia, the idea of scrapping anything of a military nature just is going to require a lot of explanation and a lot of argument. And unfortunately for Biden, even Milley, Joint Chief of Staff General Milley, who's been an ally of Biden and the Democrats in a lot of issues, and in fact has been attacked by the right wing, is kind of a major point person in opposing this. They want to maintain a stance of deterrence. And, the problem with this is a lot of people who are in the disarmament movement, who've been pushing for nuclear disarmament for decades, say this is a first strike weapon. This isn't something that deters an attack. This is a weapon that is intended to take another nation by surprise and take out their weapons ahead of time. This is not something that would be used to attack. It's a relatively small nuclear weapon that would be used to attack another military base. So it's basically for a surprise attack. And if anything, it would be something that would destabilize a situation and not stabilize it in terms of deterrence. It's a lot like the MX missile and other first strike weapons that we've had in the past. And he wanted to scrap it. And there's a lot of push to even have decline the military budget because of inflation and other reasons. But there's a lot of pushback from the Republicans, and the military industrial establishment is having none of this. And Biden might be up for a real fight. And if this war continues, it may be a tough fight for him during an election year. Dave.
Probably the toughest of fights. Just kind of big picture. There's the Nuclear Posture Review, which is a classified document, but it basically said, what are our priorities? Which programs do we need, and how are we going to spend the money? And so within that context, they talked about a philosophy, a strategy. Can we relegate nuclear weapons to the sole purpose of deterring a nuclear attack? Basically saying, where have these intercontinental ballistic missiles or these, sub-based multi-warhead missiles where, any given submarine parked off the coast of any given country can destroy many, many dozens of cities with the push of a button. We're going to keep that just to make people play nice in the world, basically Russia and China. But other than that, we probably, as a country, we need to decide if we're going to have a philosophy where we're not going to have other types of nuclear weapons. So like you said, the dumb weapons seem to be the dumbest of weapons, and they basically just drop them out of a plane. Wherever they land, they land. We probably don't need those. So those are the ones that probably could come off the table. But this is the cruise missiles. Really, the topic here you said is, can Biden continue to honor the promise he made to progressives that these nuclear tipped sea launched missiles that they would come out of the arsenal, and or not? And so, like you said, there's a unified front across all the branches of the military, across the probably nearly every Republican that speaks publicly on these things, and also many Democrats. So there's almost no chance that the president's going to be able, I would argue, be able to block this. And just for context, the military budget, $813 billion for next year. I remember when it was like, a couple of years ago, it was 700, and then it was 770. Yeah. So there's no real reason to think that they're going to stop spending more money. But let's talk about the nuclear component real quick, and then I'll throw it back to you. So this particular cruise missile program we're talking about is a $10 billion program over just the next, 5 or 6, what years? 8 years. There you go. Sorry. So over the next 8 years, it's not a very big program. That's part of a larger $34 billion commitment to overhaul the arsenal. But over that time period, like all the different nuclear elements that need small improvements, the larger improvement that's on the table is like $1 trillion. So that's the one that's not even being discussed. That's the one we're definitely doing that. So as far as I see it, this is a really small potatoes argument, and Biden has to choose his battles, and he's probably doesn't want to fight against the moderate and right-leaning Republicans, the moderate and right-leaning Democrats on this one over a $10 billion program. It just doesn't seem like it, with all things on the table right now, it just doesn't seem like ending these cruise missiles is going to be a good, successful fight and a good use of his time. But now just apply it to Russia in the context of the Ukraine conflict. Would we actually use them? And I hope it's the case. I hope is not a strategy, but I hope it's the case that no one will ever use nuclear weapons, and that this is all just so much chess.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't be practically very useful for that. If they're going to be using, the nuclear weapons, they're going to be out of the silos by the time they use it. It's not a responsive type weapon. It's a weapon if we've got a plan to basically take them out ahead of time. I mean, that's the whole point of a first strike weapon. Is if Russia's going to attack us, especially the way the war is going for them now, they're not going to wait around. They're going to basically send everything at once. I mean, I hope that doesn't happen.
Well, you're saying the United States, but I'm saying
I'm talking about Russia if they attack us.
Yeah, but right now, Russia and Ukraine is where the hot war is. It's a proxy war. And cruise missiles of this nature, it's not like you're going to vaporize 2 square miles like a conventional, traditional nuclear weapon. It's thank God these things have not been used in 70 years. But these people talk about it because you've got people like Putin out there who.
But we're not going to be the first to use a nuclear weapon. We will not do that. That will even the military. Our military will not even push that ever. The first ones to do it, if this is possible, if Putin is as crazy as some people are saying he is, would be them. And if he does it, he's probably going to go all out. I mean, that's the scary thing there. He's not going to just, lob one here and one there because he knows that his military is not capable of defending against these things or much else at this point. They really don't have it together. So he'll probably go all out and send half of his arsenal over, to whatever he's going to do. That's the real scary thing. These things aren't these cruise missiles aren't going to be any type of affair. Then the Patriot anti-missile defense might have some effect, but these things will be useless. I mean, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with, keeping them scared that maybe we'll attack them one morning when they're not expecting it. I mean, that's how ridiculous these things are. So yeah, it's only $10 billion, but it's of no strategic value unless we really are intending to attack them first. But anyway,
so just Eric, not to interrupt your train of thought, and I apologize, but we're talking about Russia, Ukraine. Let's just change the countries to China, Taiwan, and we sell, and I don't know how many, but many cruise missile destroyers to Taiwan. And so we sell these weapons to other countries, and Taiwan has a strong deterrent effect against China right now without the United States fleet even getting involved, because Taiwan can destroy, I don't know the exact number, many dozens of Chinese cities in 10 minutes. So what I'm saying is,
Taiwan doesn't have nuclear capability. The cruise missiles they're using are conventional weapons. I don't think Taiwan has nuclear capability. That's a big difference.
But I'm saying the class of weapon, the cruise missile.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's really a warhead redesign that we want to keep on the table in effect. For that delivery mechanism. Yeah. And again, we don't have to get hyped up on it, because hopefully, like I said, God willing, nothing like this ever happens. But I do think it's going to be, if we can't, like you said, if we can't eliminate a dumb nuclear bomb or a nuclear cruise missile, what kind of nuclear weapons can we get rid of? And for folks who believe that we should be waging an effort towards a nuclear-free world and towards peace, this is a major setback because of the reality of on the ground right now in Ukraine.
Well, if they push for a compromise, that's probably what the military offers. The dumb bomb can go. That's But anyway, all right. That takes us to the last part of the show. This takes us to predictions. Dave, what do you have for us?
So this is one of those ones I feel like all my predictions are like this, where I don't really feel comfortable talking about them, but it's on my radar. I might as well talk about it. On January 6th last year, the reason Jared Kushner was not in Washington, D.C. is because he was visiting Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, the leader of Saudi Arabia, the de facto leader, not the king, but the big highest ranking member of the family who gives the orders. And he got a commitment for a $2 billion investment fund. And the due diligence reviewers who manage the royal fund, the Saudi royal fund, which is many hundreds of billions of dollars, they said, look, it doesn't pass muster. There's no experience. There's no skill. They don't have the people. They don't have the capacity. They don't have the history. Let's not do it. And MBS said, well, let's just do it. This is my friend. And I run this country, so let's do it. This appears to have been to curry favor and as a payoff for their close personal relationship. So for folks who might have forgotten, the Trump administration didn't pressure accountability for the killing of the journalist Khashoggi by MBS that he ordered. We did provide them, the United States provided them with weapons to fight wars in Yemen. And also the United States supported a Saudi blockade of our ally Qatar, which is one of our largest naval bases on the planet, is hosted there. That's a very, very solid ally of ours. So I think that as this gets unfolded, it's going to be seen as a quid pro quo. It's going to severely tarnish the judgment of Trump and Kushner, and quite possibly might even there may be larger repercussions with respect to what could be conceived of as corruption and abuse of power because he was on the White House staff and the inner circle. So to be determined what consequences are, but I think it's really people are really gonna hold this against the former president and his people around him.
It's pinned in the news, and yeah, it'll be interesting. All right. Traditionally, for decades, the presidential campaigns the primary campaigns have started with the Iowa caucus, followed by the New Hampshire primary. And it has been tradition, and because of some type of promise, some sort of oath, Iowa and New Hampshire have been given these gifts forever. It's like it's written in stone somewhere that they are to be given these positions, and that any other state that tries to move its primary or caucus in front of them would be punished. They wouldn't be able to send delegates or whatever. Well, Iowa really messed up with its caucuses last time around. It was embarrassing to the party. Plus, there's been a lot of pushback because these are two very white states, very lack of diversity, and there's been a lot of concern about the fact that the candidates are chosen before diverse populations have an opportunity to even get their voices in. So the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, has basically told them, look, you two can apply. But we are now going to solicit applications to be the first the first caucus and the first primary. You can submit your applications like anyone else, but I think diversity is going to be a premium in this. New Jersey has applied, Nevada, who has held the third spot for the longest time. After that, usually comes South Carolina. That's where the black vote usually comes in and changes the dynamics a lot of times. Change it for Obama, change it for Biden this year, but we will anyway. We will probably see Michigan has also applied, and my prediction is that they're going to pick Michigan to be the first primary. I don't know who they'll pick for the first caucus. I think caucuses are on their way out anyway. They're kind of undemocratic, and people don't even understand them. They're anachronistic. At any rate, that's my prediction, and it will be Michigan. I'm not sure exactly what the timing is going to be. I try to keep my predictions to within the year, but we'll see. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to play out. Anyway, that's the news for this week. We will be back to discuss these and more. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.